The Strait of Hormuz is not open, and the president now seems to be indicating it might not be close. This is a big shift from where he was just last week when he claimed to be on the precipice of a deal. Now he is using brand new language. He tells Axios, quote, "We are low-keying it with Tehran," adding, quote, "We are only semi-negotiating with them." In fact, Iran might be moving in the opposite direction. They toughened demands for opening the strait, including demanding the lifting of sanctions, U.S. troop withdrawal from the region. Oil prices, they have been reacting to this latest positioning, jumping overnight amid concerns of what might happen next. Let's get right to CNN's Kevin Liptak at the White House for the latest on all this morning. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. Yeah, the president really describing something of a weighted out approach here, suggesting that eventually the economic pressures on Tehran will continue to mount, and that will be able to allow the president to declare victory and essentially try and move on. He says that we're only semi-negotiating with Iran. That is a distant cry from what we heard last week. The president and top officials all saying that a deal with Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz was a day or two away. Now the president saying that Iran is in very bad shape and that those economic conditions will cause the regime to cave. But what we saw over the weekend was almost exactly the opposite. Iran really moving the goalposts in a lot of ways for this deal to reopen the strait. Their new fresh demands include ending threats from the U.S. against Iran, lifting the U.S. naval blockade and withdrawing U.S. military forces from the vicinity, compensating Iran for the damage caused by this war, and lifting U.S. sanctions on Iran and unfreezing Iranian assets. That last point, I think, will be a non-starter for President Trump, who has insisted that financial relief for Iran will only come once it abandons its nuclear program. At this point, they're not even discussing the nuclear program, and so that seems like it will be a distant cry away. When you talk to American officials, they suggest these hardening demands are the result of infighting within the Iranian regime, and in fact, the Iranian official who issued this decree was replaced a day after he issued it, so there is substance to some of those claims on the part of American officials. But at the same time, clearly President Trump is under pressures of his own. You've seen oil prices tick back up. You also have those concerns about the dwindling U.S. munitions. And over the weekend, we learned that the Pentagon had issued a memo to defense contractors urging them to ramp up production. You also start to hear of American officials, including the Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane, start to talk behind the scenes about trying to find an off-ramp to this conflict. What exactly that looks like, we don't know. And we've also seen escalation in the region. Just yesterday, the Iran-backed rebels in Yemen, the Houthis firing at an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, just going to show that even as the president is low-keying it, in his words, actors and events in the region will continue, I think, to unfold and to deteriorate, John.
Yeah, low-keying it because there are reports, there are concerns that maybe the U.S. is running out of pressure points, running out of ways to push the initiative there successfully. Kevin Liptak at the White House this morning for us. Thank you so much.
First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the language that we're hearing from the president, where he says that he's low-keying it and he's semi-negotiating. What does that tell you?
I think at this point they've realized they have to change tactics because the strikes that have taken place to date by the U.S. military have been insufficient to get the Iranians to really move their position. What we've seen is a fragmentation between their civilian negotiators and the IRGC and the national security apparatus. And so it's been unable to break through. And so, due to the strikes not working, the president appears to now be pivoting towards economic pressure.
Let me ask you about the situation with the stockpiles. They are, according to sources to CNN, dangerously low, especially things like Patriot missiles. Give us some sense of what this means for our national security and what the big issues is. And if you think that this stockpile issue is what really was the final straw and why the president is kind of slowing down his threats and the actual attacks militarily on Iran.
I think it's absolutely a contributing factor to the decision not to pursue additional strikes at this time and to lean harder into economic pressure. And to the first part of your question, it does have broader geostrategic implications for the United States. So for you folks at home that aren't familiar with sort of how wars are fought or how the United States Department of War functions, you've got the world sort of broken up into what we call geographic combatant commands. There's a four-star general or admiral that's responsible for different areas of the world. In this particular case, we're talking about the Middle East and also parts of Central Asia falls under U.S. Central Command. That's Admiral Brad Cooper. Each one of those commands has war plans on the shelf. So if the president calls and says, hey, we need to take action in one of these countries, they pull the plan off the shelf and it says, okay, U.S. Army, send me 500,000 troops. U.S. Navy, send me 20 warships. U.S. Air Force, send me a couple hundred planes. And it's all dependent upon inventory that's in the system. And so the Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marine Corps, you might think that they fight wars that the troops do, but the generals in charge, the commandant, chief of staff, their job is what we call man, train, and equip, is to buy that equipment, have those troops, have those weapons on standby. And so when you delete these stockpiles, it not only impacts this particular theater, but it affects the war plan sort of globally. And that's where it becomes a bigger concern. And that's why we saw some stories that the chairman may be very concerned about this.
It's great sort of walking people through how this works, because it's really important, the series of events that has to happen, and why this is such a big issue with the stockpiles.
Oil prices are ticking higher as well as the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz looks increasingly uncertain. Brent crude, the global oil benchmark, is trading at 84 and 87 dollars, as you can see there. And it comes, of course, after Iran said that any deal with Oman over safe passage through Hormuz is not enough and is demanding more from the US to fully reopen the critical waterway, including paying compensation for war damages. Well, let's discuss this with Rana Foroohar, CNN global economic analyst and global business columnist and associate editor at the Financial Times. Great to be back with you, Rana. And let's just start with oil prices, which quite honestly would give anyone a headache if you're trying to figure out what's going to come next here, because, as we know, a few days ago, Brent dropped to below $80 and then confidence seemed to have evaporated, and now it appears to be going up again. So where do you see this?
Well, look, I think longer term trend prices are simply going to be a lot higher than we've seen them in some time. Oil began going up right after the war in Iran. It had already been actually up from the war in Ukraine and any number of other choke point and supply chain issues that we've seen. The fact that the Strait of Hormuz, which is the major global energy choke point, is not a sure thing. It's very much in play. I think this means that the market is not going to go down to anything that looks like normal in the next few months, if not years. And I think even if you see a deal, we've heard about deals so many times. Trump loves to talk about deals, but oil markets are based in reality. And right now people want certainty. And I think it's going to take, again, months, no matter what happens, to create that. So I'm not looking for oil and prices and oil-related inflation to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think just to underline your point, Rana, let's take a closer look at the shipping through the Strait of Hormuz now. We can show our viewers the live marine traffic as it stands, which is probably pretty much at a standstill, because whatever the United States president is saying, the vital waterway is not really open, right? Iran will not release its control until and unless the United States ends the blockade on Iranian ports. And the list, of course, doesn't end there with the list of demands. So it looks, Rana, like we're at a stalemate here, right? We're still stuck.
Yeah, and I think maybe what's even more important is the fact that the U.S. is not in control of this game. Iran is in control of this game. That was the major own goal, frankly, of the Trump administration in just starting the conflict in Iran. Iran had the high ground, literally. The Revolutionary Guard was made for this moment. The U.S. almost immediately took out anybody that the government could have negotiated with, and you get a lot of hardliners in charge. Iran knows it now controls this choke point, and the fact that it's in conversation with the Omanis, there's a sense that the middle powers, if you would consider Iran a middle power, certainly not a global power, but that they're now setting the terms of the debate here, and that's not what the Trump administration wants. It's been arguing that the U.S. can open the strait, no problem, but there is really no military solution here. And Iran is in charge. I mean, that is the sad fact for Trump, the U.S., and for oil markets.
Washington saying they are low-keying negotiations with Iran. What does that mean for the current stalemate that we appear to be in over the Strait of Hormuz and for the widening war at this point?
Well, honestly, nothing good. Nothing good at all, because low-keying negotiations, whatever that means, although he then explained it by saying it appears to me no more military strikes, but doubling down on economic pressure on Iran. I think all of this just really reflects that President Trump has a smaller and smaller range of options when it comes to dealing with Iranian defiance, because that's what we're seeing right now, is the Iranians really standing firm. Economic pressure has been on Iran for the better part of the last 30, 40 years. It's done very little to change Iranian behavior, as has American military action. So I think this really shows that the US is stuck between a rock and a hard place right now.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that, economic pressure has been on for decades, because shipping analysts say that the US naval blockade of Iran ports has currently brought all oil export activity at Kharg Island, which is, of course, the terminal handling almost all of Iran's crude exports, to a near halt. Do you think that could be giving the White House a sense that it could pressure Tehran into the deal? Is that behind the messaging on, the economic pressure that Donald Trump was putting out there?
I mean, it appears clear that whoever is advising the White House is advising them to keep the pressure up. And it's undeniable that domestically, the Iranian government is facing an increasing economic crisis, and it has been for months now. Every time we think the Iranian economy has hit rock bottom, it continues further down, and the war has done nothing to help them. But the point is less an economic point and more a political issue. The government views this moment as existential, so their pain threshold is really high. They have made a political decision to continue fighting this war and to stand firm against the United States. And it's for that reason that I don't think economic pressure is going to do anything.
And for Iran's part, it is pushing a new list of demands for the US to meet, including a permanent end to the war and the blockade of Iranian ports. It also wants to see sanctions lifted, assets unfrozen as compensation for war damages. Is the Trump administration likely to meet any of those demands? And does Iran truly believe that it will?
Well, some of those demands were agreed to during the MOU that neither side then proceeded to implement, really. The remaining were things like sanctions and asset releases. Those were supposed to be negotiated. There was supposed to be a timeline for their release that was negotiated between the US and Iran. And of course, we all know what happened. Those negotiations really never happened in the end because the MOU wasn't implemented. I think what this shows is, again, that the Iranian side feels emboldened right now. It feels confident. It feels it has the upper hand despite all of the domestic issues that it's facing. And importantly, I think the main takeaway for the Iranian system has been the language of pressure, the bullying, the tough rhetoric. All of that appears to work with the Trump administration. So they're really turning the tools that the Trump administration has used against them and many others in the international community back and using it against Trump himself. And at the moment, it appears to be working because the US president appears to want out of this conflict. And like I said earlier, he really is stuck. So what this shows is the Iranians are tougher, they're doubling down, and they're ready to keep going.
Dina, so great to have your analysis as this a never-ending stalemate, it seems, continues. Thanks very much.